Hi, I'm Brian Welk here in TheWrap's virtual studios at the Sundance Film Festival for 2021. And I'm here talking with the team behind Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street. And I'm joined by Marilyn Agrello, the director, and producers Ellen and Trevor Crafts. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So tell me about, I'm pretty young still. I grew up with Sesame Street, but I was certainly not around in the late 60s or early 70s. So as you were going back through old footage and maybe just in your own memories, take us through just how odd and how revolutionary and just so much of a cultural phenomenon Sesame Street was when it was really first kicking off.
Well, in the era where Sesame Street was born, as you know, the late 60s were a really tumultuous time in this country. And there was a lot of protests and a lot of consciousness raising around the war and around civil rights. And from this, many activists were formed. And this group in particular of activists started Sesame Street. And it really came out of all these movements to highlight things like the gap in education between children in the inner city and children in the suburbs, and the gap in education with children of color and white kids, and all of these issues. The fact that it came out in a show for preschoolers, to me, is amazing and delicious, and one of the things that made this project so irresistible.
And what led you to this project as well, to the producers, yeah.
Well, I was a Sesame Street kid growing up, and I remember watching the show with my dad and my mom and in our basement in Long Island, and just loving this amazing place, this world that was built. And I think that one of the things that, as Ellen and I grew our company Macrocosm, it's all about world building and showcasing worlds that were built and finding those projects that we were really very passionate about. So I read Michael's book, and as a kid who loved Sesame Street so much, and then as an adult, I thought, I know everything about Sesame Street. I know all the Muppets, and I know everybody. But there were so many stories that I was absolutely blown away by. And if, as sort of a bigger fan of the show, if I didn't know these stories, I had a good idea that lots of other people didn't know. Really, the struggle that it was to create this show. Now we see Sesame Street as an institution. It's like oxygen. Sesame's always with us. But back then, it was this ragtag group of people that really were trying something truly, experimental.
Yeah, and it was in reading Michael's book again. What I responded to, of course, I grew up on Sesame as well, and I was inspired by the gang. This gang of rebels, as Marilyn always likes to say. It's so true. They were at a time where people were being asked to step up and to come up with ways that they could help change the world, and they chose television for children. It was revolutionary, to your question, Brian. It had never been done before. And it was a huge experiment. The government was involved. They gave them money. It could have gone terribly wrong if it didn't go well. And, there's this wonderful moment with Joan Gens Cooney in the film when she said, and when it finally hit the air, because it was years in development, it was like a whoosh, she says. And from there, it just ignited like a fire.
I think sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so Ellen was in and I was in, and then it was really just about us finding a director that could help shape this vision that we had of this amazing documentary.
I think what was phenomenal for me was, when this whole project started, as you're at the early days of it, we really had no idea what it was going to look like, what it was going to be called. It was just like, we have an idea or we want to do something because we don't like what we're seeing out there in the world in kids television. And what even more blew me away was the budget that this show had, that it would be like $60 million in today's money, which is astonishing for any show, but especially, public broadcasting. But I guess, talk about going through all this footage and how much did you have? What were some of the challenges of putting it all together into one story?
Well, the amount of footage that we had to source was immense. Besides the interviews that we shot, there was so much archival that sometimes we had to wait months and months investigating how to get a hold of it. That one public service announcement about take your kids to the ghetto, that was something that John Stone mentions in an interview that he saw, and it gave him the idea to put the show on the steps of a stoop. And we waited almost 9 months for this commercial to be located and then for us to get it. So also there was this incredible a treasure trove of 16 millimeter footage that was shot by a crew member, Victor DiNapoli. He was on the crew of Sesame Street, and he wanted to make a documentary about the inner life of the show and the backstage and how it all looked and felt. And so we were so lucky. He never completed his film, but we got all of that 16 millimeter footage that is so intimate and personal, and you really get a sense of what these guys, the camaraderie that was there and the love that was there, and interviews with Jim Henson and John Stone. And so we were so happy and so grateful to be able to find all of that.
And I think that's one of the things about the DiNapoli footage, as we call it. This kind of footage, I think, as we see so much now in documentary footage, or documentary filmmaking right now, is that it is this found footage. It is this look back in time at something that you weren't able to see before. And we have a great partnership with Sesame Workshop for their archival, where they basically opened the doors to us. And I have very fond memories where Ellen and Marilyn and I were literally swimming, wading through the most fantastic photos that you've ever seen. And it's a 50-year program. And that's, I think, was one of the hardest things for all of us, for our gang in making the movie, was where do you start? That's sort of easy. You know where you can start, but where do you end? Because it is a continuing story. And, we have this great period of time with the footage. And that's really where we sort of concentrated on this first 20-year period of this most experimental time and this wonderful beginning moment of Sesame Street. And the footage really shows just when everybody is just jamming, and it's the best.
It was a bonus, and it was hell to have so much. Because we were like, oh my gosh, we want to use it all. And Marilyn mentions archival. We had an amazing archival producer, Rich Remsburg, who found things that people had not seen in 50 years.
Found stuff that Sesame Workshop hadn't seen.
So that made it equally, or I should say doubly hard.
How important was it to capture the mood of the culture, of the surrounding culture, really, because it, as you've already mentioned, Sesame Street was so entwined with the culture, with the look of the rest of the world, and how it wanted to, convey, the music and the art and of that time, and be irreverent and experimental. And, how did you tap into everything else that was going on around?
You can go to YouTube and see so much you can go to Classic Sesame Street and see clips from all those early shows and see how wild and experimental it was on a certain level. But what we wanted to show in our movie was what people don't know. We wanted to surprise everybody with the fact that this was actually a political statement. This show was so much more than a kiddie show. They brought educators and comedy writers together. They did things that were so sophisticated. The humor is so sophisticated, but beyond that, we wanted to show how it felt for these people and why they were so motivated to do this. And so this is why we're so proud of this film, because we are pulling back the curtain on so many things that people don't know about this topic they think they know so well.
Yeah, it's the gang. And I think that's the magic. I think Nick Raposo, who was Joe Raposo's son, the original musical director, composer. I mean, I hate so many. Genius. And he said, it was this constellation of stars truly that aligned at this time, that came together, and they really all complemented each other. And the original idea was using Joan, Jim, and John as sort of our our pillars, for lack of a better way of saying it, where we meet the rest of the gang, where they, everybody, show how everybody forms, the whole. And that was incredibly fun and difficult because the gang is huge. But we think that we did our best, to Marilyn's point, to represent what we hope was what everybody was feeling at the time and the energy. And we chose specific people to help tell that story. And we think that it, is representative of what we were trying to do.
And I think that also when you're looking at any documentary, I think the best ones tell not only the story that they're telling, but also a larger story as well. And in, seeing what the culture was like at that time as our counterpoint to what our gang was experiencing and what they were creating, there's also a lot of parallels to what, what's happening with us today as a society and as a culture. And I think that was a surprising thing that we didn't expect to see so many parallels from that time to our time now.
The documentary I was thinking of as I was watching this was the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, from a few years ago. And there's a moment in that movie where you see a bunch of like Fox News clips of them saying like, this is how Mr. Rogers has changed kids or has influenced them. And Sesame Street has its own share of like controversies and political backlash. Was there stuff that surprised you as you were telling this?
I, for one, had never been aware of this Mississippi story, that actually it was banned in the South because Black and white people were living together on the same street. And I also was very surprised about the Roosevelt Franklin story. I initially thought that maybe the white parents couldn't handle Roosevelt because he was too Black and he spoke too Black, but it was actually the Black parents. It was the parents of the Black children who didn't want that to be symbolizing their culture. So it was so many fascinating little subtle things that there's so many layers to this story. And what I know, speaking for myself, but I know these guys feel the same, we love that people think this is a story about Sesame Street and we're going to see the Muppets and all of that. And it is, but it's 100 other things that you don't see coming. And I think that's what we love the most, or that's what I love the most.
Adult documentary about a kid's show, I guess, in some ways. But do you guys have a favorite Sesame Street moment as you were combing through all this material, or not? It might not have even been in the film, but there's just so many countless hours of things.
We all heavy sigh on that one, Brian, because
it's
yeah, we've been working on this since 1865, so there's a lot of different ideas here.
And our rough cut was long.
Yeah, we had a long rough cut.
But I honestly, for me, I love the moments where the Muppets interact with children. There's so many amazing moments of the kids, that in these really real interactions, where they don't really get, even if there's a Muppeteer behind or below where this character is, if they're looking at Grover, they're talking to Grover, and I think that just conveys the wonder and magic and possibility of childhood and why childhood is so important and why we should be supporting kids and making sure they have all the things that they need, because it's such a precious and fragile time. And so I really loved combing through that and then making decisions around it was very difficult. But
and I think for me, it's also around kids, but it's actually around our own kid. We brought our daughter to Sesame Workshop when we were first starting the project and really digging into it and doing the archival. And we have some great photos of her then. And then just recently, last year, we went back and
2019.
Yeah, 2019, we went back and she was there again. And it's like we're seeing our small toddler grow into a kid over the time, and it's all around Sesame, and it's in Sesame Workshop, and it's there. It's a fun sort of add-on.
For me, although I talk a lot about the revolutionary aspect and the political aspect and how important that is, the pure unadulterated joy for me are the scenes where the Muppets mess up the lines. And
Yeah.
because you can feel their irreverence. And I love hearing the crew members cracking up in the background, because you really get a sense of how much fun this was, and how loose they were, and how, off the charts they were. And when they would let go and curse each other out and as Muppets, it's just fantastic to feel the love that was there.
Okay. Grover was always my personal favorite as a kid.
I'm with you, Brian.
Yeah.
Grover and I have the same birthday. Grover and I have the same birthday, October 14th. So
Wow.
we're bound together cosmically.
Okay. Well, thank you both, you all so much for joining us today.
Well,
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Appreciate it.